Yeah, in my artistic research, I record how space is created and perceived through movement, narratives, and memories. Going back to my beginnings of studying space, there was always this fascination for the structures we live in that are shaped through geographical changes, through geopolitical changes, through history. There was always a longing for trying to understand urban landscapes with my own body experience, through performative studies and visually in drawings, objects, installations. The own individual spatial experience in urban landscapes through long walks was important to develop the method of mapping and summarizing movements to a simultaneity, which is central to my practice until today, and what I would like to introduce first. Besides the own experience of urban landscapes, I try to understand the perception of space of other individuals. In interviews, I collect narrations with collaborators and participants and visualize their understandings and memories on space. Through that, I try to understand multiple perspectives on sociospatial structures. With the double time graphs, I will reflect on the method of mapping the resonance of time in narrative spaces. And in the second part of the lecture, I would like to give deeper insights into this recent project, Daily Roads, from 2023, in which I expanded my method of mapping multiple temporalities and when we also collaborated with the hybrid mapping group. So what do I mean with mapping movements to a simultaneity? The movement which takes place every day follows the given spatial and architectural elements and forms an additional invisible space within and in relation to the architecture, objects, and other beings. I summarize movements that happen over a longer period of time by mapping to simultaneity. The action to sit down on a chair is an example of a single unit of a so-called movement space that inhabits our daily life constantly. The temporal reconstruction of movements in an animation approaches the temporal spatial structures that invisibly get inscribed into our body knowledge. In this example, in the private place at home, Universität des Arts in Paris. The temporal additive summation of the movements shows changes of relations to static and movable objects and moving subjects. Through the overlaying of movements in time, densities of lines at certain places appear while other locations in the room keep untouched. The movement space is shaped through an aggregation of moves over a longer period and usually has soft, round edges, as corners are generally avoided by people. Individual movement spaces in public spaces are created, for example, in kiosks, as here, this one in Warsaw. The drawings often allow a view of bodies seen through and beyond their skins and a view of architectural structures seen through their walls. This is a method that appears in works of various drawers, for example in Julie Meretu's hybrid landscapes or in the iconologue drawings of Matthias Reinhold. The permanent reproduction of common routines is condensed in the drawing on the right at the ground floor of the waiting hall in Ulm. The movement of the pencil recreates the movements of human beings. The line created on paper, the overlaying of one line on another, reflects the character of human movement in relation to static elements of space. Through the observation of motion, I increasingly incorporate the temporal aspect of spatial constitutions into visualization techniques. Central plazas are places where interactions of inhabitants come together and where movements from different directions are happening at the same time. It is not only the layout of the plaza and the architecture that gives the place its structure. It is the movement and all the spatial relations in between all the movement subjects and objects that give the central plaza its intrinsic logic over time. For example, in the Patelnia, the metropolitan platform close to metro and bus stations in Warsaw. Street sellers standing in the middle of the platform have an impact on the movement of the Warsawians rushing to the metro station on their way to work. Space is created in time. But there exist different temporalities in this spatial creation. The history of the city shaped the form of the square. The arrangement of the infrastructure and the architecture do not change in this animation. They were built in the past. Watching this arrangement in the duration of a day, a week or so, the architectural form emerges as continuous. But the temporality of everyday interaction is fleeting. Its continuity consists in the routine repetition, which becomes visible through the method of overlaying these transparently watercolored spatial relations into simultaneity. It's very silent here. But inside this huge pattern of movements, also each individual has his and her own biographical structure. People create not only physical relations to other beings, objects, places, historical events, but also in their mind. They build relations to other people, beings, objects, places, historical events. Memorized interpersonal relations are materialized in this installation. It is the perspective of one person who looks back on 80 years of life, so I make a huge step to another project. The installation is based on 16 narrative interviews between 2019 to 2022 with this one senior. He's suffering from dementia. The color strips materialize references to other persons. Each string materializes one interview of these 16 narrative interviews. Each paper strip, a sentence. Each color assigned to a person who played a role in the sentence. For example, blue for the father, purple for the mother. The length of the strips relate to the time the narrator was telling about. The paper strips turned around slightly and refer to the fragility of the memory. The mapping of memorized interpersonal relationships helped me to understand changes in the narrations over time caused by dementia. This work is a part of the long-term project Space Biography with Fragile Memory. I visited seniors suffering from dementia over 3 years, visualizing their spatial experiences and memories. Special for this long-term project was that I collected many interviews with the same persons over 3 years and that I mapped the changes of memorizing in the narrations through double-time graphs. Double-time means here the diagram with a historical timeline in the vertical that shows the historical dates and the horizontal timeline that shows us the narrative time. So I approach the spatial biography procedurally in the relation to historical or biographical events in the past, and I map the memory of changes in animations, which reveal the resonance of past and present in the conversations. So you can see here, summarizing all interviews of one interviewee in an animation, the weighting of certain data become visible in relation to memory capacity, and superpositions and condensations reveal how certain experiences of my respondents, for example, geopolitical caesuras, acquire more frequent resonance. In the following, I would like to give insights now into the performative and participatory research project Daily Roads. Within that, I connect 2 approaches simultaneously. First, the tracing movement spaces to understand social spatial structures and intrinsic logic of places. And second, recording and mapping of narrative spaces to understand processes of imagination, perception, and remembering. The project was full of various aspects of time and space, of individual stories and common movement spaces that merged together to a multi-channel installation in Teatro Vážna Nova in December 2023, together with Rafael Masur, a sound artist, who recorded the soundscape of Nova Huta. So we created a multi-layered pattern in time and space. This audiovisual installation was based on the research action, which I already said that I will introduce now and show now. I would like to present now parts of these approaches. A small introduction about the place, the City of Artistic Research. Nova Huta is today a district of Kraków in southeastern Poland. It is a city constructed from scratch after the World War II in communist times and has become an attractive destination for young people and families in recent years. But it was not long ago that it was still known as a poor and dangerous part of Krakow. Originally designed and constructed as an ideal city which provided for the workers and their families social lives close to the huge steelwork, the city has gone through economic and social transformations after 1990. While the architecture survived the time of transformation nearly unchanged, many residents lost their jobs and general prospects after 1990. The oldest part of the city, called Stara Nova Huta, is popular for its residential areas that surround individual community enclaves in a homogeneous-looking city complex, with dominating main streets and monumental facades. While the specific structures of the housing estates became part of the workers' identification with the steelwork, new residents carry out their everyday activities with less personal connection to the industrial area. With each new generation, it gradually gained recognition as a green place with good access to educational and healthcare infrastructure. I'm quoting here Kacper Kempinski. I came with following questions to the old part of Nova Huta, and it was that I was wondering, have social changes led to new forms and ways of people's movement, as well as different perceptions of the social space of Stara Nova Huta? And how do individuals reconstruct their daily roads from the present and the past? And what could I learn from the daily roads of the inhabitants in Nova Huta? To approach these questions, I realized a performative and participatory research action. So during 6 days, I walked through the streets of Stara Nova Huta with a living room table on wheels in order to understand the specific character of the city with my own body and perception. This was quite important for me, the feeling of body space awareness, which creates a simultaneous perception of everything that has ever taken place in a space, present and past, real and imaginary, to refer to Passagenberg of Walter Benjamin. There is also a reference to performers, as for example Francis Alice, who is staging the body and everyday practices in the urban landscape. At the same time, moving in public space with the noticeable furniture as an attribute aims to engage with residents. A map of the oldest part of Nova Huta lies on the round table with a diameter of 1 meter. On their way to carry out their daily duties and habits, passers-by encounter my research path. I invite them to participate by sharing with me their daily routines on the table. My personal movement map through the city gets interrupted for the duration of the conversations. The furniture constitutes a link to the personal everyday life. The map of Stara Nova Huta on the table connects locals with their individual city knowledge and makes participation easily accessible. Together we speak around the table and gather their daily spatial routines in relation to the city's urban structure, creating narrative maps on the map. Thus I get an idea of their own images, of their physical environment today and in comparison to the past. Here to see my table on wheels and its setup. Next to the table is a box with pencils, markers and tape, and under the table a roll of blank spare tracing paper. An action camera and a microphone are installed above the table in order to record the mapping processes from a bird's eye view. The table is round, so we do not interact from 2 sides, but we can circle around and change perspectives dynamically. So for the 6 days, I engage in conversations with 47 people who draw their daily roads in the form of narrative maps on my table device. The participants range from senior citizens, middle-aged people, and young residents to children, and I meet first and second generation migrants, as well as new residents. This map was lying then on the table, It refers to the plans from the 1950s to incorporate the Vistula meadows, what you can see on the bottom. It's called Łąki Nowochódzkie in the ideal city structure. So you can see this Łąki Nowochódzkie, the Vistula meadows, located right next to the central square of the old town. The large-scale steelwork, which is mainly disused, lies outside of the chosen detail. The map predetermines with that a focus on the housing and living situation of today's Nova Huta. As soon as the participants begin to draw their paths on the map, I try to let them direct the conversation. The narrator starts with a certain location on the map, with their current home, the home from the past, the favorite place, and so on. They draw a line that grows and has a destination. Usually it makes a loop and comes back to the starting point, or just stops at its destination. The participant continues with their second path in the second sequence, later with the third road in the following sequence, and so on. They reconstruct their individual movements in a specific order from the perspective of that day of the conversation. Along the roads drawn on the map, my participants mark and describe certain buildings, monuments, or borders. They talk about changes in the courtyards, or of closed shops and restaurants, or new cafes. Looking at the drawn cognitive maps with the city map underneath, we can localize the lines, we can understand where exactly the subject moves in relation to the urban structure. I go on. Without the underlying city map, we see forms and compositions in the individual outlines, all created by lines, loops, and line branches. The lines have directions, they end or begin. There are lines that spread out and lines that concentrate only on a small part of the paper. On the base of the recorded video material, we draw together with the designer and architect Hanna Grotner the maps in form of vector files in order to animate them. This allows to view the mapping in its chronology. Redrawing the lines enables to look at the different roads separately in their chronological order. It allows to compare the sequences of different interviewees with each other in a visual way. In comparison, there appear individual types of map figures. On the top, we can see that the roads spread across the map in loops from housing estate to housing estate. I noticed that these spread maps are often works of middle-aged and young residents with the dog, with the children, or with the partner. These unfolding journeys seem to relate to other bodies and to the present. On the bottom, we see maps that have this markant shape on the bottom surrounding the Vistula meadows, highlighting the green recreational areas as important places for everyday life in Nova Huta, also today. And these were also seniors that were talking that from the first generation. With the vector files, I can superimpose various maps together. For example, only the spread roads, in this case here. Or I can choose a certain road of a specific location, as here, for example, the Vistula meadows. Here I play with its specification, which let me understand more detail the individuality of each single memorized road of the same location. In the installation, you could hear the voice of an interviewee describing the vegetation of this place and how it was treated in the past and today. Also, you can listen to the sound that was created by Rafał Masur, who was recording at this place. The sound here in the space is not that good. So we have, on the one hand, the physically analog collected maps on transparent paper, and that can be overlaid physically, creating a static common map. And on the other hand, we have the digitally recreated maps with which I can work in its temporality. Let's make a next try. In its temporality summarized to a common movement animation, lines are first appearing mainly from the home and then spreading out to the parts in the city. The beginning of these mappings are shown here in a repetition, what gives the audience time to dive in. So this part is from the installation in the theater. And it's summarizing all the maps in its chronologies. Recording the mapping processes from a bird's eye view captures also the time that interviewees spend to explain details, the gesture of their hands pointing to the neighborhood or simply into a direction, or marking and talking about buildings on the map without drawing. Memories of biographical events emerged during the mapping process. The participants refer to historical data, events, and so on. And also the respondent's observation is also influenced by the present, the date of the interview, which in this case it was in the summer of 2023, before the upcoming parliamentary elections in October in Poland. So we have gestures, notations that cannot be shown in the animation of the simple lines. And yeah, all the additional descriptions disappear as long as we do not hear the voice. This was the projection on the floor in the theater. In the multi-channel installation, I could simultaneously show excerpts of stories on the projection on the floor, while on the wall, abstract lines of the maps created a pattern of daily roads. The audience could listen to the stories through the headphones. The installation allowed an approach of the different temporalities on various levels. But to conceptualize this, there was quite a process behind. Compared to the previous projects that I showed you, in this project I expanded my approach on the plurality of temporalities and its interrelations. I analyzed the appearance to references to the present, to the biographical events, and to the historical data along the narrations. Not to forget that the references are influenced by the present, the moment of the interview. Here I made some tries how to approach this character of biographical references in the form of an icon. The city dweller report on their current biographical phase as children or as a teenager, a young adult, middle-aged or senior citizen. The interviewee gives several notes on different biographical data in the past. And yeah, so beside the biographical time references, there is also the city and its historical temporality. Also here, the present impacts the residents' reflections. There can be several historical references. Recording one's own biographically conditioned paths in the city inevitably allows biographical and historical time to emerge simultaneously. I wonder if it is the intersectionality of both times that emphasizes the special features of the city. So each personal story of Nova Huta's residents exists in different relationships to other beings, biographical data, to the daily activities, to the present, to specific places, to the architectural layout of Nova Huta and its buildings and changes in history. Along their narrative mapping processes, these references appear in a certain order. And I created these kind of diagrams to understand the sequences. More detailed specifications about certain historical or recent periods or of biographical experiences along the narrations are unfolded in double time graphs with a vertical historical timeline and a horizontal narrative timeline. So here, what is now here different to the previous double time graphs is that I divide this double time graphs into the biographical time, which you can see here in the yellow, when the narrator refers to the biographical events and so on. And the red markers shown, are showing the historical periods after 1948, the time after constructing the old town of Nova Huta and afterwards. The purple markers go into the past, before the town existed. That means before 1948. So the resonance and frequency of historical temporalities along the narrative timeline let me draw conclusions about which periods determine the greatest spatial sociological changes from the interviewer's point of view. But I missed the visually readable references to the specific places and buildings in these double time graphs, which I noted in the diagram shown earlier. With localizing the temporal references along the drawn daily road on the map in a vertical dimension, three-dimensional time maps were developed. The verticality in the map here marks again the time which the narrator is referring to. This three-dimensional time landscape shows a single story as an individual space along Nova Huta's geography, urban landscape, and history. I added green marks which refer to nature, parks, and green areas, blue lines which are architectural references to the ideal city layout, and pink references to recent changes. Together with Hannah Grotner, we are in the working process of visualizing also the specifications of these references in icons. In the time landscape of ID4, we can see how the reference to the past before the city existed is spread out on the white parts of the map, so the purple, yeah, while the red markers are placed more locally. While in the double time diagrams, what you can see also on the right side here on the page, the frequency of historical references become visible. These three-dimensional maps unfold the spreading of historical or biographical temporalities in the city. With the gray in the back, I support the three-dimensional reading, and here also you can see again that I was drawing it with tracing paper. The blue, the architectural references to the ideal city layout, and the pink to the recent appearing elements. Yeah, unfolding the simultaneously existing different temporalities to three-dimensional maps visualizes individually created topographies of interconnections of movement, location, narratives, biography, and history. It is only the animation which could help me to show the frequency of historical references along the spreading across the urban landscape. Mapping the individual time landscapes in time unfold the individual spatial stories and relations, the topographies of interconnections of movement, location, narrative, biography, and history. It is a more detailed view on the individual perspectives on the sociospatial structure of the city. This first animation is just a sketch, I have realized in the last week. But I think it can already give a sense of what I could approach with this method. So thanks for your attention.